Commission resumes. I must remind those in the chamber that the municipality doesn't allow food to be brought into the chamber. And if it happens and some food is left in the chamber, then we will get justifiable complaints from the municipality, and they may, even if it's bad enough, decide that we can't stay here any longer. We're here very much on a basis of, on a gratuitous basis. The municipality has very kindly made the premises available to us, and there are certain rules that we must comply with. We must see to it that they are complied with. You're still under oath, Mr. De Rover. Mr. LaRue.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. De Rover, before the adjournment, you'd agreed with me that given the accepted principle in international law that those in command of an operation where higher levels of force are anticipated as a possibility, that they must plan and command those operations in such a way that they minimize the risk of the use of lethal force. So given that, you would agree with me then that when assessing the lawfulness of deaths caused by police in a planned operation, it would be important to consider intelligence, planning, briefing, command and control, and the decision-making in that operation by the senior command. Would you agree with me?
I think that offers the outlines of a basis on which you could decide to look at such an operation. I would actually add that the obligation goes way beyond that. That because you are officials of the state and you are entitled in situations and under certain circumstances to employ what could end up being lethal force. So what could be legitimate killing. It's not just in a particular operation. It actually means that the organization as a whole needs to have systems and structures in place when it comes to how you organize your task and how you implement that task. And that's not just the paper trail. I think part of my problem with some of the observations has been exactly that whilst I understand that this commission desperately needs an auditable trail, you are dealing with actions of individuals, and sometimes only the individual can speak to what they did, why they did that, and what result it produced, and for you then to, through questioning, establish whether that was premeditated or accidental. If you leave that part out, and you only want to rely on what you can independently audit, you get a skewed picture. Or if you overemphasize the significance of the auditable trail, you might lose valuable insight. Now, can I just in that connection refer to the Stockwell investigations in the UK, especially the report Stockwell 1. It is included in the 3 binders that I left with the evidence leaders last year. I know it's a long time ago because my statements are now 1.5 years old. But Stockwell 1 is in there, and I put it in there for a reason, because it shows you an investigation conducted by the Independent Police Complaints Commission in the UK into the shooting death of a totally innocent Brazilian student on the subway who was mistaken to be a suicide bomber. And it seeks to establish how this could happen. And it's important to stress that everything Mr. White has said about gold, silver, bronze command, designated senior officers, it seemed that all requirements were in place, and nevertheless a disastrous decision produced. Now, I'm not so much interested in the consequence as in the process, because the IPCC acknowledged that it wanted an auditable trail. Where that failed, where they could not bring up documents that supported police statements, they lamented that, and they came forward.
I'm sorry, Mr. Someone's got
My apology, Mr. Chair.
Is it a cell phone or a tape recorder or a computer?
Does the laptop?
It's making a noise. Please turn it off. Otherwise, I'll ask the owner to leave the chamber. Carry on, Mr.
they lamented the absence of records, and it led to recommendations to strengthen future processes. And I think that some of the work Mr. White has been involved in with keeping the peace and its evolution in the subsequent document is testimony to the efforts that have been made to remedy auditable trail deficiencies. But they existed. The Commission went to police officers to get the information they needed to fill the blanks that could not be explained by officers or by documents that were available to it. And it treated police officers as witnesses of truth. And that sits well with their public role as agents of the state, the oath they swear. So unless you can manifestly prove that someone's lying or trying to pervert the course of justice, or they committed a criminal act and you need to change their status from witness to suspect, you treat them as a witness because they are obliged and bound by their oath to tell you the truth. Now, Stockwell in the end culminated in a reality where someone ended up being shot dead, and it has never been clear whether the Gold Commander actually gave the order shoot to kill. It's a convolution of misunderstandings, misinterpretations that led to an innocent person's death. What you see as a consequence is that it's not just about the operations that you run, it's about the way you organize. And I'd contend that whilst I agree that you can look at the level of the operation and say for future operations we want better safeguards. But again, I'll talk about unraveling systems, but if you only focus yourself on that level, I don't think that you are going to build structures that stop another Marikana from happening. That's just my problem, that if you don't bring it up to the level of how the police organizes as an organization, how it trains its personnel, what it teaches them, to what standards it holds them, how it is managed and who does the managing, if that's not part of the equation, that problem can't be solved. If you don't go one level higher then and say that those that exercise authority over the police in government, there needs to be a structure to how police receives policy direction that goes beyond a phone call to a PC on a mobile. Those are not, I think, the types of auditable trails you'd be looking for if afterwards you need to render account. So that's a long story, but...
Mr. Rover, just with regard to the question posed, on a practical level, that would be very pertinent to the number of firearms and the kind of firearms being used in an operation, isn't that so?
Look, the basic thing, if you don't have it on site, you can't use it. Now, sometimes you take the attitude better sorry with than sorry without, but there are certain types of weapons, and I consider military assault weapons have no place in law enforcement, full stop. And that I say aware of particular problems of violence South Africa faces, but to me the solution is not in the police arming up. The police needs to arm down and smarten up.
While you're raising the question of auditable trails, a small point, but it makes a big difference in this case. For some reason I don't understand, the police didn't keep a tape recording of all the radio exchanges, their gaps, their disputes about what was said at certain times. Surely that's an elementary principle. There should be a tape recording made of all traffic on the radio. That must be elementary, is that right?
Chair, in Stockwell 1, it was proven by the IPCC that decision logs were not being kept. And in cases, for example, of the overall commander, Cressida Dick, she compiled her log many hours after the events occurred. And still, that did not help to explain to the Commission what now actually happened and facilitated this wrong identification and the disastrous action that followed, where the ones executing it were absolutely and totally convinced that they were dealing with a suicide bomber about to detonate a device. Now, I agree with you. I think the one solid recommendation for the future, and that technology exists, is that you record what transpires, because the dumb reality is that for as long as events concur with what you foresaw them to be, it is easy to keep records and to keep your decision log or your occurrence book and to just put down everything is happening as you foresaw it. If you take the policing operations around the elections, they went down without a hitch, and I'm sure that SABC will be able to show you model plans, model occurrence books and decision logs, and all went as planned because everybody had an interest to see that this went down the way it was foreseen. But once incidents start to develop in a direction that you did not foresee, or you consider to have a low probability of developing, there is a discrepancy between what you expect and what occurs. And if you have two people keeping track of what you are saying, the possibility is that you can't keep up in registering what you are doing and the orders you are giving with the speed that you are issuing them. And subsequent, there is an issue. Now, Stockwell had that same problem. The IPCC acknowledged that police officials conferred to try and establish the chronology of what had transpired. Rather than calling that collusion, they said, look, it's inevitable if you do not have, because they did not have recording in the UK on that incident. The incident room that was used did not provide for verbatim recording, video or audio. They said it's inevitable that police officials would compare records and try and help each other to piece back together what now actually has happened and how did it happen. And you have to then take on advance that they do that with the best of intentions, not to pervert the course of justice or to give a version that can't stand the light of day. But they do that with good intent, and it is part of a professional responsibility. So there are a simple base recommendation: videotape everything. There are countries where any questioning of a suspect in interrogation, everything gets videotaped. So if there ever is a dispute, a suspect in front of a judge claims that undue pressure was exerted, those tapes will be commanded and they will be viewed, and a decision will be reached. And it's easy because you have your auditable trail.
Mr. De Ruyver, let me bring you back to Marikana.
Sorry, Mr. Rue, just one final word. Apart from anything else, it saves millions. In case of a commission like this, that sort of precaution would save a lot of money, probably millions of rands, because the commission could obviously do its work much more quickly, because a lot of disputes of fact can't arise because there's the objective evidence which proves what was said over the radio and the video material as to what was happening. The videographers, as you know, for some reason left the copy and didn't go just behind the police lines. They went to the jock. They didn't go to scene 2. So therefore there's room for an enormous amount of debate as to what happened, which takes time to unravel and of course costs a lot of money.
Chair, it's irony that actually the costs I would put under the heading of preventing this kind of thing are marginal when compared to the cost of trying to repair it now. Because your process is only the first step. It hasn't actually led, and it won't, to repair. It will lead to recommendations and choices that need to be made. There are countries that routinely have their officers go out even on patrol wearing individual cameras, and everything gets recorded. If in Australia you get stopped by traffic police, that entire encounter is filmed from the car, but also from the officer that will approach you. So at any point, and you get advised of that fact. You get stopped, they tell you it's a traffic stop, and the first thing after that, the officer will advise you that the encounter is being videotaped. And if need be, that videotape will be used against you in a court of law. And it's copious amounts of information. And you don't use them as big brother to find fault with everything the police does. But the problem, what it does give you, is a solid tool that when things do go wrong, at least you are able to piece back together the chronology and to understand how things occurred, in what frequency, and to identify the actors in it without discussion. Where now a lot of your time has simply gone into establishing what is the chronology, who were the actors there, what were they doing, and you haven't even managed in many stages to answer the question how did that happen and why. And those are critical questions that the equipment you refer to would at least assist in answering, because you'd have the rationale behind the decision making and the discussions that lead to it as they happen in real time.
Mr. de Rova, I need to ask for your cooperation, and if you could shorten your answers, that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah,
It's true, although it was my fault to some extent. I asked him a question, something I was particularly interested in, but he's taken the point, and so have I.
Mr. de Rova, bringing you back to the particular operation that we're considering in this commission at Marikana, what has struck me in your two statements is that you don't conduct a review of briefing, planning, command and control, intelligence, deployment of resources, etc., in any great level of detail. And I'm interested to know why that is. Were you briefed to conduct a comprehensive review of the operation? Because what appears to us is that you appear to have been instructed to consider the allegations that the police deliberately set out to kill the strikers. That seems to be the question that you're answering in your statements. So, first question, were you briefed to conduct a comprehensive review of the SABC operation in all of those elements that I've mentioned?
I've answered to you. My terms of reference are written down. I don't feel that it's my place to give them to you or to the Commission, but you can request them from SABC, and I don't see a reason why you would not get those.
Thank you, we'll do that.
Specifically,
yes.
Nothing has been, instructed, guided, directed. I've said at the beginning, and I will reiterate that, my existence in an international field since 1992, and having visited and worked with police forces in more than 70 countries, doesn't come from jeopardizing my professionalism or my integrity. So I'm also not going to do that here. And I've made that when I was first approached by SABC in the week before the 28th of February, I've made that abundantly clear. And my personal motivation, they are in a lot of difficulty with regards to Marikana. I understand that. Some of it of their own making, and maybe you will find that they should have foreseen. That is open for discussion, and it is constantly being discussed here. My attempt has been to not reduce the issue, as I've seen yesterday. I understand sometimes you can take people to a point of saying, if that vehicle hadn't moved there, then this wouldn't have transpired. But that is at a micro level. That's a tactic in an operation. So that won't answer your fundamental questions. So what I've done, and please, my statements are 1.5 years old. A lot of the statements I was confronted with this morning, like for example of Ms. Molman, is dated well after that submission. So it's problematic. I had limited access, a short period of time, and a desire at least to try and give a perspective that would also allow to do what the Commission wants, is to look at relevant international standards, relevant international practices.
Mr. Rova, in your statement you refer to the unfettered access that you had to any of the evidence and information relating to Marikana. I understand there was a time constraint from when you were briefed in February to when your statement was filed on the 8th of March. But you haven't been, when you have sought information, you haven't been refused that information by the SABC, have you?
No.
And when you've been provided with information by the SABC, you've obviously used it when you were doing your statements, correct?
Correct.
But there may well be a universe of information and facts that you have not been briefed with, and therefore you can't be blamed for not being able to have reference and consideration to that evidence when you were reaching your conclusions, correct?
That's correct.
To return to my question, were you asked, in your terms of reference, which we will request from the SABC, were you specifically asked to look at intelligence, planning, briefing, command and control, and accountability? Were you asked to look at those 5 themes?
No.
Was it within the scope of your brief to look at those 5 themes?
I could well have done it, and there is probably, and I need to clarify that here, there's probably a misunderstanding at that time on my part of what this commission was supposed to do. It's only become clear later to me that the parties that are here, besides assisting the commission, also have a personal, if I can allow the wording, a personal case that they represent, an argument. So I was aware of the fact that there were 2 other international experts, and I'd read early statements of both that already went into that. Now, I can give you more of the same. I thought I'd try and focus on something different that would actually then assist the Commission, because you have 2 qualified experts that have looked in detail at that and have made their findings and presented their argument, and there has been cross-examination of those. So it wasn't, on my part, a deliberate attempt to not look at it, other than misunderstanding your role here. Had I better understood that, I may have well decided to say something about it myself and to measure that. But the benchmarks that were used by Mr. White and Mr. Hendricks are, by and large, accepted international benchmarks. I likely would have come with similar findings.
So I understand you haven't done the exercise, but would it be fair then to say that subject to what was identified as disputed or disagreed between the Human Rights Commission and the SABC in the expert process that took place, and of course we've had very little response, if any, from the SABC in that process, and other than to the extent Mr. White was cross-examined, are you broadly in agreement with his analysis of those 5 themes? Planning, briefing, intelligence, command and control, and the accountability questions.
You know, and I think it has come out in cross-examination that at a general level, I don't have an issue with those, because as I said, his analysis is based on internationally accepted standards. The issue is always with, can you make it relevant in a local context? And Stockwell is from his parent country and police force, or to all intents and purposes. The deficiencies, the apparent deficiencies there, so if you put at 100% the general requirements, in Stockwell, if you analyze it for yourself and take issue with my percentage, but
Mr.
they did
Dorova,
not manage...
Could I ask you to concentrate on Marikana? Obviously, Stockwell will be useful in submissions to the Commission, but if we could, given the time constraints,
No, I understand the time constraints, but
keep the
he's entitled
focus
to
on
use...
Marikana.
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you, forgive me. He's entitled to use Stockwell to buttress his argument, not his argument, his evidence in relation to Marikana. As long as he's conscious of the fact, which I think he is, he's talking about Marikana, he's entitled, when he's dealing with the application of sort of world best practice to Marikana, to refer to Stockwell, which is a famous incident which has been exhaustively written about. So I think he can carry on, but you'll bear in mind, Mr. Roo hasn't got unlimited time, and so she's very worried
I appreciate
when you and I talk for too long on any topic.
I apologize, but I do think it's important to say that ideally you'd hold a police force to 100% achievement on those points that Mr. White has made. Stockwell shows that it wasn't possible. What it has done is lead to recommendations for improvement, but it didn't lead to condemnation, because none of the officers involved have been held accountable for the death of Mr. de Menezes. There has been no finding of illegitimate killing. So what I'm saying here is, whilst I acknowledge the pertinence of Mr. White's findings, I I take issue with the relevance in the local context, and particularly in terms of SABC's ability as an organization and police force to comply. Because best practice is something that you can afford economically. You can have the cost to bring it into your organization, and you can train your people to the level to produce that result, and then you can sustain it. So, and then it can be your best practice. So if you impose a standard, you have to, I think, also ask these questions. And that I think, is critical. I think that SABC's ability in absolute terms, and I'm not talking ill will or bad design or, I'm just saying that I don't judge SABC's ability to conform to the requirements that those standards put on par with the UK police. So their score would never be a perfect 100. Even at the onset, with the best of intentions and the best of will, they would not be able to score 100.
Mr. Dorova, I want to just clarify something on the record, because when I said earlier that there'd been this opportunity to set out points of disagreement and agreement between the experts, the response that was received from the SAPs appeared to have no input from yourself and appeared to have been drafted by the SAPs legal team. Is that a correct reading of the documentation we received from the SAPs in that process? That you never engaged in an exercise of identifying points of agreement and disagreement between yourself, Mr. White, and Mr. Hendricks? Have you done that exercise? You did that exercise for the SAPs. What document was produced that records those points of agreement and disagreement? Because we've never seen them.
I don't know better than a document was submitted to you last year by the SAPS legal team, but that part of the process is not my responsibility. I know that I was approached and asked to sit, and at the time it was with another counsel of the SAPS legal team, and I spent several days going through an extensive document on points of agreement and disagreement.
So the document that was produced to us in June of 2014, you did have input into that document?
Can you direct me to one that I can have a quick look?
It's JJ 178.10, and then JJ 178.11 was a request for clarification that we made to the SAPs on those points of disagreement, to which no response was received. It's page 178 in your bundle, Chair.
Can you again give me the date reference, please?
The date reference was the 1st of June 2014. Mr. Rover, I won't waste time now. We'll give you the document in the lunch adjournment. You can advise me if that's the document that you did have some input into. Taking you then to the operation at Marikana and your brief, and if I can take you in your first statement, FFF11, to page 12, paragraph 51 of that statement. There you recorded that a full confrontation with a large armed group of around 300 individuals, although considered and catered for in contingency plans, was in fact never really anticipated until the afternoon of the 16th of August. And I'd like to unpack both elements of that. The first is, what contingency plans are you referring to? Because we haven't seen any contingency plans that seem to match this description.
What I've written there, Chair, refers to the, at that time, conversations I had with General Annandale and Colonel Scott, where they showed me the written versions of the plan and talked me through the intentions. And contingency then, for example, refers to the support role of the TRT in situations of dispersal, disarm and arrest where that may become a necessity.
And what, perhaps over the lunch break, if I could ask you to identify the exhibit, if we have it as an exhibit, that is the written plan that you were shown by Officers Annandale and Scott. If you could, we'll do that in the lunch adjournment though. So other than whatever document they showed you, it was a written document, correct? It wasn't just the Google Earth image that existed at the time.
If I recall correctly, because that was in the first week when I was here, they used slides from Exhibit L.
Okay, so you never saw a written document that was a plan? Okay.
Not at that stage.
Right. Were you told by either Officer Annandale or Scott that what you were being shown was in the plan on the 16th of August, was in existence on the 16th of August?
My understanding of what I was being told was that that was part of the plan. I realized when I look at the level of detail that you attach to, that maybe I should have been more critical in examining, but I understood. I was given a briefing as to what had occurred, and on the most part I listened, and I had the occasional question or clarification, but they did a lot of the talking to talk me through the events.
So other than being shown portions of Exhibit L and this oral briefing from the two commanders, you weren't given any written documentation that purported to be a contingency plan?
Not that I recall now, but you're talking 1.5 years ago.
Of course.
I'm not sure.
Then in the same paragraph of your statement, you talk about, you state that a full confrontation with the large armed group of around 300 individuals was in fact never really anticipated until the afternoon of the 16th of August. Now, there are 5 pieces of evidence that I'd like to ask whether you were aware of when you wrote this statement for submission to the Commission. So I'm going to give you the 5 pieces of evidence. If you can tell me if you were aware of those at the time that you crafted that.
If they're dated after the 8th of March, then obviously not.
No, these are facts, not documents.
Okay.
So the first is, did you know at the time that you drafted the statement that the JOCCOM meeting at 6 a.m. on the 16th of August began with a briefing that said that day was D-Day? Were you told that the 16th of August was D-Day?
Yes. So, yes, I was.
Were you told before you wrote your statement that shortly after the 6 a.m. JOCCOM, and in response to the discussion of a possible tactical option, Brigadier Fadzale requested 4 mortuary trucks to be placed on standby? Were you told that?
No, I've only heard that discussion come out here in the Commission. I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. Did you know at the time that you wrote your statement that after the JOCCOM and before 9 o'clock, Majors General Mpembe and Annandale warned the Provincial Commissioner that a proposed tactical option carried a risk of injury and death to strikers?
Sorry, may I invite my learned colleague to repeat that? It was a little too fast for me to comprehend.
Did you know at the time that you wrote your statement that was submitted on the 8th of March 2013 that after the 6 a.m. JOCCOM, before 9 a.m. on the 16th of August, Majors General Mpembe and Annandale warned the Provincial Commissioner that a proposed tactical option carried a risk of injury and death to the strikers?
Chair, I would hold that to be...
Chair,
I don't remember that evidence. I'm not saying it isn't the evidence, but can you give us the reference to it, please?
Chair, I'll get the references for you over lunch.
I must confess I don't remember that. I think that was the basis of Mr. Semenya's objection as well. But if there is a reference, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I just don't remember it.
Chair will get you the references, but for now, Mr. Derova, if you could assume that between the 6 a.m. JOCCOM and before 9 o'clock, those two commanders warned the Provincial Commissioner of the risk in the tactical option.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Wouldn't it be sensible for us to get the evidence on that before he's expected to answer the question?
Chair, I think it would be appropriate if he just assumes that for now.
I don't think he should be asked to assume something that may be wrong.
Chair, the entire cross-examination of Mr. White and Mr. Hendricks proceed on the basis of assume this evidence, assume that evidence. I'm merely doing goose and gander one more time.
lunch is going to come up in a couple of minutes. It isn't as if there's much prejudice for that answer to stand over until we resume. So I think that's better. But can I ask a question before we take the lunch, Joan? Exhibit L, slide 78, gives what purports to be the operational plan for stage 3. It's on a page which has a calendar page for August, indicating this was on the Tuesday the 14th. And the plan they set out is to disperse the strikers into smaller groups, encircle and disarm. That is essentially the plan as it was announced or agreed to at 1:30 on the Thursday. Lieutenant Colonel Scott conceded in his evidence that that was not the plan on Tuesday. When he was asked, and in fact only became the plan on Thursday at about 1:30, when he was asked why this was included in Exhibit L, he gave the explanation that it wasn't malicious. It was simply done to make it easier for the Commission to understand the development of the plan. And what I want to know from you is this. When you were shown Exhibit L, were you told that slide 78, which gives what purports to be the plan already on Tuesday, was in fact not the plan on Tuesday, that was merely inserted there without malice to enable the Commission, and presumably you, to understand the development of the plan better?
Chair, I can't recall seeing this particular slide. I can't recall a particular reference to when different stages would become operational. But you tell me if you don't want me to. I have no problem with addressing the question that was just put to me, as a matter of course. But
the question was just put to you by Mr. Roux.
Yeah.
Well, my problem is I don't remember that evidence. I don't say it wasn't given, and we've had a lot of evidence. We've got well over 35,000 pages, so I may be forgiven for not remembering it. But we're taking lunch in a minute.
Yeah.
So after lunch, he'll give us the reference. If he's correct, you can answer it. So, Mr. Leroux, convenient for us to take the lunch adjournment now?
No, Chair. I'd like to finish the 5 pieces of evidence, if I could. Then that point is rounded out.
All right. Provided you don't put the bit that I can't remember.
Chair, I have the reference for you. It's day 181, pages 21719 to 21728 and 21661 to 21662.
Those pages on the screen when we resume after lunch?
Yes. So
we'll now adjourn for lunch.